Okay. There's room here on this side as well if someone's looking for seats. Yes, and it's an important one. Probably he's given his personal blessing for us. As I said, as interesting as the first session was, and actually set the table for the second session, Dr. McGutchy had in fact talked about civic nationalism, civic sense of what it is to be Ukrainian. This next one is exactly that topic. It's actually called Working to Embrace All Those Who Live on Ukrainian Soil. And moderator will be someone who is well known. I've mentioned him twice in the opening. He is one of the pioneers of, in fact, our West Roundtable series. Another two pioneers have just entered the room, the McConnells. And so this is, I've got a funny feeling this entire session, in fact, this entire conference is going to be old friends understanding what they have to do next. But anyway, moderator Orest, Deychakiwsky, panelists, the most Reverend Borys, Gudziak, Josef, Zissels, and Kyle Parker are assembled. So I think, Orest, this is all yours. Yes.
Sorry. All right, welcome to this morning's panel. Thanks for joining either in person or online. Before I introduce our panel, let me share a few quick introductory thoughts regarding our broader theme. First, independent Ukraine has quite a good, solid, though by no means perfect, mind you, track record with respect to religious liberties and treatment of national minorities, despite the Kremlin's absurd accusations of oppression of Russians or Viktor Orban's regarding Hungarians in Transcarpathia. And this has been the case since independence, and it helped, as some of us in the room know very well, helped to garner important international support in those early years when Ukraine was still a relative unknown. All citizens of Ukraine have suffered tremendously from Russia's brutality, irrespective of religious or ethnic identity, especially those in the East-South. Just think of the Crimean Tatars, which have been mentioned, or even think of the ethnic Greeks who live or lived mostly in or near Mariupol, or Jews who have lived throughout Ukraine for centuries, among others. Think of all the churches and religious communities that have been destroyed. And let's not forget how members of national minorities and religious communities, except for the Russian Orthodox, were treated in Russian-occupied Crimea and Donbass even prior to February 24th. But members and minorities are not cutting and running. There's a solid civic engagement. There's civic patriotism. They are loyal citizens fighting for what is, after all, their homeland too. Everyone realizes that there's no scenario worse than Russian occupation. And that includes, and I'm going to single them out, the Roma, who in Ukraine, as in so many European countries, have faced discrimination and marginalization. And yet, Ukrainian Romanis serve in the military and territorial defense units, and Roma NGOs volunteer and organize shelters and deliver humanitarian aid. And religious communities have definitely been doing their part, and more, certainly in case of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, to help. They've stood up resolutely to this unjust evil, aggression that includes the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and Greek and Roman Catholics and Protestants of various denominations and Jehovah's Witnesses and Jews and Muslims. And even, it's debatable to what extent, but even the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, formerly the Moscow Patriarchate, has disassociated itself from the Russian Orthodox Church and from Putin's altar boy, Kirill. The bottom line is that despite the genocidal campaign, Ukrainian identity, both ethnic and civic, is stronger than ever. Ukrainians are not willing to give up their language, culture, history. And we see, again, a powerful civic Ukrainianism, a feeling of national pride, and a desire for a free democratic future. The notion by Ukrainians that we're all in this together, irrespective of religion or ethnicity. And with that, I'm delighted and honored to introduce, well, I'll introduce the first speaker first, and then I'll introduce the others right before they're going to speak. I can spend half our allotted time just talking about their extensive accomplishments, and I encourage you to read their full bios as well. Our first speaker, Archbishop Borys Gudziak, since 2019 as Metropolitan Archbishop of the Archeparchy of Philadelphia, has led the Ukrainian Catholic Church in the United States. Before that, he served in France as bishop. In fact, he recently celebrated his 10th anniversary of his episcopal ordination. Of course, he was a priest for a lot longer than that. He has served, as I think everybody here knows, as rector and president of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, which is the leading, I think, cutting-edge Catholic university, not only in Ukraine, but in the region. It wouldn't have happened without him. And one final thing, and I can't help but to mention this, this is near and dear to my heart, but just this last May, Archbishop Borys was the commencement speaker at the University of Notre Dame, which is my alma mater as well. And he's in good company because the majority of US presidents of going back to Dwight Eisenhower have been commencement speakers at Notre Dame. So with that, let me turn the floor over to Bishop Borys.
Dear Orest, dear Walter, I thank you for this kind invitation and the opportunity not only to participate actively, but to learn and listen to the speakers that have spoken already. I will try to say something about what is happening in Ukraine and Ukrainian identity as we work to embrace all who live on Ukrainian soil. That's the subject that is given. And I will try to speak about foundations and roots, which means history in the past, but also about challenges and perspectives of the future. We live in uniquely intense times for those who are Ukrainian, Ukrainian American, or friends of Ukraine. There's incredible trauma, and there's singular heroism. There's death, destruction, deep wounds, which, and we should have no illusions about them, will affect the victims of this war for the rest of their lives, and if they are not addressed properly, can become transgenerational, as some Ukrainian historical trauma did become. And at the same time, Ukraine is at the epicenter of global change. Global politics, diplomacy, military alliances, agriculture and food policy, the economy and energy, all of this is profoundly affected not only by the Russian invasion and aggression, the brutality and war crimes, but more importantly, I think, by the Ukrainian resolute resistance. And I want to delve into this a little bit because the commentary, both expert and popular, is wow, look at those Ukrainians. And the wow is not only a complimentary exclamation, but it's an expression of surprise. Where does this come from? We didn't expect it. One Italian diplomat who had served in the 90s as the ambassador of Italy in Moscow, in a club similar to this in Washington a few weeks ago, told me, we were so wrong. We were so wrong. And, you know, today, Prime Minister to be Meloni is trying to wiggle away from Berlusconi's statements, which continue to be wrong. The far right. But Prodi was wrong. Merkel was wrong. Bush was wrong. Obama was wrong. And Trump was scandalously wrong. And what don't people understand? What don't people see? What is missed? Often what is missed is what is deep, what is foundational. And it's a pleasure to be here with colleagues and friends who refer to, for example, the experience on the Maidans. Often the commentary was, oh boy, the Maidans failed. There were such great hopes, and look what happened. The Orange Maidan, the Maidan of dignity. I was never of that opinion. I think we were always making steps forward that didn't preclude the possibility of steps taken backwards. But human development, the mystery of being human in a human community is a very complex reality, which we often do not look at in an integrated way. We are seeing particularly important developments in Ukrainian identity, nationhood, self-consciousness, and consequently, because of the importance of this war in Ukraine's resistance, a broad global effect of these changes. Ukraine is changing, and Ukraine is changing the world. Ukrainians are changing, and everybody else has to kind of wake up to what that means. Previous speakers have spoken about the history of Ukrainian statehood, and we have a millennial history. But it's important to remember that the human race has been around for millions of years. There was a time when there were no Ukrainians, and probably there might be a time when there won't be. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a community? What does it mean to be a nation? There are the processes that are outlined by philosophy and ideologies from the Enlightenment, at least on. But there are deeper human realities which are at play in Ukraine. And these are often ignored. And I want to propose that it's very important to look at the spiritual life of the people of this land. We look at continuities, we look at structures that identify, unify, and hold together this people, this nation. Well, the structures that have the longest tradition are the churches. Millennial, unbroken tradition where you can name the leaders, tradition which has a codified worldview, something that determined the calendar, the festivals, the celebration, the mourning. In other words, the culture of the people of this land. there are different churches and different confessions, and we don't live in a time of theocracy. And that is not what I'm pointing at or proposing to focus on. What I want to say is that I believe that the Maidans and the transformation of Ukraine are impossible without seeing the role of spiritual life, the life of the churches and religious communities. Case in point, anybody that was on the Maidan, and I don't know if there have been exact studies of this probably, but in 2004, was aware of the fact that a majority of the people on the Maidan were from Western Ukraine, from the Lviv, Ternopil, Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast. Today, we hear the call, Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. This is not something from Kyiv or Poltava or from Donetsk. We see how a slogan spread from Western Ukraine, from an underground movement, from the UPA world. Most people have no idea of the genesis. It's become pan-Ukrainian. And even a man who 3 years ago could say, what difference does it make? What difference does it make whether our streets are named after genocidal communist rulers, as long as they're paved? You know who I'm talking about, the president of Ukraine, who did not see that decommunization, which Volodymyr Vyatrovich was a leader of, was so crucial. Today, there's no question in Zelensky's mind that ideas, history, identity, and a certain cohesion on a cultural, spiritual level is crucial for the country. That Western Ukrainian society that led on the Maidan in terms of numbers was formed by the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was able to have that kind of impact in independent Ukraine because it was a catacomb church, which did not compromise as a structure with the totalitarian authorities. That church came out of the underground with unique moral authority. It has 8% of the population, adherence of the population. It's a minority church. But its leader, Lubomir Huzar, was really unquestionably the number one moral authority during his years of leadership, and he remains somebody whose picture and whose words are on billboards in the capital of the country, and monuments are going to him, being built to him outside of Western Ukraine, the historical kind of reservation of Ukrainian Catholicism. Not only was that historical witness, that heroic witness, something that was one of the seeds of the heroic witnessing today, but very importantly, Catholics in Ukraine, beginning already in the late 80s, started to enunciate, articulate in a style determined by Andrei Sheptytsky Catholic social doctrine. Sheptytsky did not write big manuals. He issued pastoral letters. And for those who have followed this, and there are compendiums that bring it all together, over the last 30 years, Catholics in Ukraine have addressed hundreds of social issues. everything from abortion and army, you know, to economics, salaries, justice, judges, peace, war, drunk driving, speeding. All of these topics and hundreds more have received attention in pastoral issues. And Catholic social doctrine in its modern form, which was kind of given a push by Pope Leo XIII in the 1890s, somebody whom Metropolitan Sheptytsky knew personally, has three basic tenets. One is human dignity. Second is solidarity. Third is subsidiarity. And if you look at the Ukrainian resistance today, if you look at the performance of the army, these three principles are at the heart of the phenomenon. Ukraine's struggle, admired by the world, is a struggle to defend human dignity. It is expressed through incredible solidarity in the country. The economy of Ukraine has been crippled. Various estimates, I think there might be economists here that can correct me, but that 40% of the GDP has been lost. In my 5 trips to Ukraine since February, I did not see street people. I did not see people in normal circumstances, not in the occupied circumstances, who were hungry. That's quite incredible if you imagine that there's 7 million internally displaced persons. This society has come together in incredible solidarity. And that solidarity is now radiating and connecting many people in many countries of goodwill. No phenomenon in human history has been so immediately present as the war against Ukraine and Ukraine's defense. Thomas Friedman called it the World War Wired, proposing, maybe hyperbolically, that it was much more, that this is more of a world war than World War I or World War II, accentuating the awareness and the solidarity that is occurring. Human dignity, solidarity, and subsidiarity. What does subsidiarity mean? Subsidiarity means making decisions at the lowest level, empowering people, having decision-making processes that recognize human dignity. It's not Batyushka Tsar, somewhere at the top, a president, whether it's Yushchenko or Yanukovych or Zelensky, making decisions, all decisions for everybody. Subsidiarity means decision-making is made at the lowest level, and people at the lowest level take responsibility. And that is one of the keys of the success of the battle of David against Goliath in this war. A 20-to-1 ratio in military budget 5 years ago, Russia to Ukraine. The military capacity is still much greater, notwithstanding the great international and especially US support. But it is the fact that lower level officers, people on the front, men and women, have a sense of responsibility and have a chance to make decisions that is making this army different. I believe that the enunciation of Catholic social doctrine, the witness of members of the Catholic Church on the Maidans, the avant-garde that this community has represented has made an impact on all of Ukraine. President Zelensky, unbeknownst to him, not knowing these histories, not knowing these, let's say, principles, is who he is because he has followed the people. I think it's very important for people to understand that President Zelensky is a great leader because he followed profound, God-given intuitions of the people: human dignity, solidarity, and subsidiarity. The future will require this kind of approach. Hopefully, it will be as effective. Hopefully, it will be more conscious because the challenges will be greater. All who live on Ukrainian soil, working to embrace all who live in Ukrainian soil. The biggest question of Ukraine is who will be living on that soil? The biggest question will be demography. The biggest question will be life. Who is going to be living that life in Ukraine? If today the population hovers in the low 30 millions, a 40% drop in population in 30 years, a birth rate that does not sustain replacement, the 7th highest abortion rate in the world, the lowest birth rate in 2001 recorded in recent decades in any free European country was in Ukraine. 1 child per woman. Life, the hope for life, the giving of life requires a complex, integrated understanding of what the human experience is. National dignity is important. National identity is something that saves people from the dangers from without. But there needs to be foundational, structural, deep understanding of what the challenges are, what the traumas will be, and what possible solutions can be formulated to make sure that Ukraine, after the victory in this war, will be able to embrace all those who live on Ukrainian soil. Catholic social doctrine will be an important contribution to that future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that deep and thought-provoking presentation, for reminding us about the importance of the spiritual life of a nation and its connections with the resilience we see now. And thanks for reminding us about the importance of things like human dignity and solidarity and values, because that's ultimately what matters. So thanks a lot. Let me introduce our second speaker. Josef Zissels is a prominent Ukrainian intellectual, author, and leading member of Ukraine civil society, and a longtime leader in the Ukrainian and world Jewish community. But Mr. Zissels was a name well known in the diaspora to many of us back in the 1970s as a Soviet dissident, political prisoner, and as a member of the Ukrainian Helsinki Monitoring Group, the largest and most severely repressed of the Soviet Helsinki groups, which called upon the Soviet government to live up to their freely undertaken Helsinki human rights commitments. We're very pleased that Josef Zissels can join us from Kyiv. So please, the floor is yours. Proszę.
Добрий день. Вітаю вас з України. Шановне товариство, дуже радий приймати участь в такій важливій конференції. На жаль, цього разу я не зміг приїхати, як раніше, і виступити перед вами, бо, по-перше, і вік уже в мене не дуже...
Чи можете почекати хвилинку, тому що ми недобре вас чуємо?
Коли можна починати, пане Оресте?
Прошу, тепер вже, я думаю, краще вас чути.
Добрий день, шановне товариство. Радий приймати участь у такій важливій конференції. Дякую організаторам за запрошення. На жаль, я не зміг приїхати цього разу до Вашингтону, як у минулі рази, і виступити перед вами, бо йде війна і дуже багато роботи, де і вік у мене вже не такий молодий, щоб їздити по світу. Тому я вирішив все ж таки виступити через Zoom-конференцію перед вами і сподіваюся, що ви за це на мене не образитеся. Моє повідомлення міг би назвати таким чином. Етнічні спільноти України на тлі російської агресії. Чому я кажу етнічні спільноти, а не етнічні меншини? Бо в Україні в останні роки є тенденція називати от таким терміном ті малі національні меншини, які проживають в Україні. Саме спільноти, а не меншини, як у всьому світі, майноріті. Ну, щось нове ми вписали тепер і не тільки своїм героїчним захистом України, але й новими термінами. Етнічні меншини, етнічні спільноти завжди мали свою окрему, інколи досить визначну роль в історії різних держав, особливо імперій. І це цікаво дуже відслідковувати, як поводилися себе етнічні меншини в імперіях під час різних імперій. Особливо це цікаво, коли ми спостерігаємо за такою жорстокою імперією, як російська. Ідентичність меншин в імперії обумовлена передусім орієнтацією керівництва меншин на центральну владу імперії, на метрополію. Бо тільки метрополія в умовах імперії, особливо жорстокої імперії, може дати права меншині або відібрати ці права. І в умовах імперії меншини дуже обережно відносяться до тих прав, які їм вдалося отримати від керівництва імперії. Так було завжди. І в 18-му, і в 19-му, і в 20-му сторіччі, де зберіглася Російська імперія у вигляді Совєтської імперії, все одно меншини орієнтувалися на центральну силу, на центральну владу. Це інстинкт самозбереження імперії, в імперії меншин. І з тим нібито нічого не поробиш, бо інстинкт є інстинкт. Він закладений у колективній підсвідомості малої групи будь-якого народу, коли вона перебуває в діаспорі. Але починаючи з 19 століття, ми починаємо бачити, що меншини поводять себе вже неоднозначно, так, як я сказав перед цим. Тобто, орієнтуючись тільки на центральну владу в метрополії. Можу навести за приклади, і історики мене поправлять, бо я не історик, я за освітою фізик-теоретик. В 19 сторіччі в польських повстаннях проти Російської імперії, проти царської влади, в 1830 і в 1863 році у лавах повстанців, польських нібито, були присутні етнічні меншини, які проживали тоді на території вже розділеної Польщі. Це були різні люди різного етнічного походження, інколи досить суттєві по кількості. Це стосується передусім українців та євреїв. Були і різні інші представники нацменшин, які попали до лав повстанців і воювали разом з поляками проти імперії. Чим це викликано? Така неслухняність етнічних меншин в імперії. Я думаю, це проблема генерації, старшої генерації, яка була керівником в меншинах і намагалася утримувати ті права, які вдалося їй здобути від імперії, і молодь. В умовах певної асиміляції, яка в 19 сторіччі проходила всією Європою, в умовах зміни формату суспільства з корпоративного на загально таке вже демократичне, молодь мала розгалужені контакти між представниками молоді різних етнічних походжень. Вони дружили, вони разом працювали, вони разом вже вчилися, бо пройшла емансипація і трошки українців, і євреїв. Вони вчилися разом з поляками, дружили з поляками, кохалися, як завжди у молоді буває.
Пане Zissels, чи чуєте мене?
Так.
Чи ви можете перевірити, чи ваша кнопка на переклад ще є включена?
Так.
Чи ви можете виключити зараз?
А вона повинна бути включена на англійську чи на українську?
На ніц. На оригінал. Аудіо оригінал.
Можна продовжувати?
Так, тепер ліпше. Тепер ліпше вас чуємо.
Продовжувати?
Так, можна продовжити.
Добре, дякую. Участь євреїв і українців в польських повстаннях говорить нам над певними тенденціями, які проходять в Європі між націями імперськими і меншинами, які намагаються допомогти титульній нації цього народу, зокрема полякам, звільнитися від імперської залежності. Це показує, що молодь починає протестувати проти політики керівництва своїх общин, яке пристосовується до імперії. Тому не випадково, коли ми живемо вже у 21 сторіччі, ми бачимо продовження цієї самої тенденції. Це добре видно по таких маркерах розвитку нашої ідентичності в Україні по Майданах. Я був на останніх всіх Майданах і бачив, як зростає доля представників етнічних меншин серед людей, які були на Майданах. На що це нам показує? На формування громадянської або політичної нації в Україні. Коли активна частина меншин приєднується до активної частини українців і разом з ними приймають в найважливіших процесах зміни ситуації в країні. Це нам показує, що у майбутньому процес утворення з імперських меншин і імперських націй, з загальногромадянської політичної нації буде в Україні продовжуватися до певного рівня, коли він буде вже визначати повністю життя України і її реагування на різні виклики життя. На моє переконання, саме громадянське суспільство, прообраз громадянської нації є основним двигуном України до її майбутнього, до її європейського майбутнього. Ми бачимо, як громадянське суспільство на Майданах збільшується, незважаючи на короткі історичні дистанції. Наприклад, у 2004 році на Майданах, на Київському і на інших, мала участь по нашим підрахункам 1–1,5 мільйони чоловік. Пройшло 10 років, і під час Революції Гідності приймала участь вже 5–7 мільйонів чоловік. Здавалось би, еволюційний процес формування політичної нації не може рухатися так швидко. Але Україна послідовно якраз проявляє ту підвищену швидкість формування своєї колективної ідентичності. І в цих процесах зміни своєї ідентичності національні меншини представлені поруч з титульною нацією держави. Зважаючи на те, що я сказав перед тим, як поводили себе меншини в імперіях, можна зрозуміти, що генезис, тобто розвиток ідентичності меншин у бік політичної української нації, залежить від розвитку ідентичності української нації. Тобто меншини змінюються з невеликим відставанням від зміни ідентичності титульної нації. Чим більше українці стає українцями, тим більше меншин стає також учасниками української політичної нації. І ми присутні, ми є не тільки свідками, ми є учасниками оцього генезису української політичної нації. Куди рухається це? Я називаю цю категорію національним консенсусом. Що я маю на увазі? Це, що коли наступає ситуація, коли, наприклад, 75–80% населення України в результаті своєї еволюції мають приблизно однакові уявлення про своє минуле, сучасне і майбутнє. Такому народу вже не страшно нічого. Бо тоді рівень соціальної інтеграції, соціальної мобілізації під час викликів сягає ось цієї цифри 75–80%. По соціологічних дослідженнях, які проводяться в Україні за останні 30 років, ми бачимо, як змінюється соціальна дистанція між різними етнічними елементами українського суспільства. Якщо раніше, у 90-ті роки, найближчими українців були росіяни і білоруси, євреї, поляки і інші, то тепер ситуація через 30 років помінялася. І росіяни, і білоруси, особливо за останні роки, коли йде війна спочатку на Донбасі, а тепер по всій Україні, збільшилася дистанція до росіян і до білорусів, а до поляків, до євреїв, до кримських татар вона зменшилася. Оце таке опосередкована ілюстрація соціологічна тої процесу еволюції української політичної нації. Відомо, що меншини в діаспорі поводять себе дуже активно. Бо їм треба витрачати більше зусиль на досягнення тих самих соціальних рівнів. В умовах імперії еліти національних меншин конкурують між собою за отримання додаткових прав. Але з часів незалежності України ми бачимо, як ця конкуренція зменшується і сходить на нівець. Це якраз і показує процеси формування політичної нації, коли люди різного етнічного походження, різних сповідань релігійних стають громадянами однієї політичної нації української. І цей чинник для них важливіший, ніж свої національні чи релігійні інтереси. Особливо це проявляється зараз під час війни. Бо ми бачимо, як національні меншини приймають активну участь не тільки в воєнних діях, в українському війську, в українській територіальній обороні і так далі. Вони також активно приймають участь у різних гуманітарних проєктах, які пов'язані з жертвами цієї війни, цими мільйонами людей, які постраждали від війни. Оця еволюційна трансформація меншин, я колись жартівливо проілюстрував такою формулою. Що ми раніше були совєтськими євреями, у 90-ті роки ми перетворилися на євреїв України і разом з Україною почали шукати свою нову ідентичність. І наступний крок, вже остаточний, це наше перетворення в українських євреїв. Тобто представників української політичної нації, які мають свої окремі інтереси у релігійній, у етнічній сфері, але чинники важливіші загальногромадянські, загальнополітичні. Важливо, що важливішим чинником розвитку як української ідентичності, так і ідентичності меншин, була отримання незалежності. Бо найпотужніший чинник розвитку ідентичності політичної нації – це є утворення держави. Якщо б ще й влада була настільки розумна, щоб розуміла питання ідентичності і проблеми, то процес еволюції нашої політичної нації був вже ще скоріше протікав би, ніж це є насправді. Але процес і так іде. Останнє, я хочу навести соціологічні дослідження, які були проведені у лютому цього року, коли було вже зрозуміло, що починається ось війна. І результати були такі, що 57% опитаних сказали, що вони готові протидіяти російській агресії. 37% сказали, що вони готові взяти в руки зброю і піти воювати з Росією. Це дуже високі показники. Я не впевнений, що в Європі всі держави могли би дати такі показники, готові воювати. І ми бачимо, як представники національних меншин воюють проти Росії разом з українцями. Особливо хочу відмітити кримських татар, представників інших мусульманських спільнот і євреїв. Наприклад, в українській армії воює зараз більше 1000 євреїв, зокрема 2 сотні ізраїльтян. Так, нам відомі вже десятки загиблих, як в єврейській громаді на фронті, так і в мусульманській громаді. Те, що я розповідаю, надихає нас на те, що Україна буде і далі робити потужний спротив російській агресії, навіть в умовах, коли ще не досягнуто національного консенсусу. Тому ми повинні запитати собі, 57% готові боронити, а 43% решта, на що вони готові? Ця цифра зменшується за роками, але досить повільно. І всі зусилля громадянського суспільства і держави повинні бути направлені на досягнення національного консенсусу. Бо тільки він дасть нам гарантію нашого незалежного існування. Слава Україні! Дякую за увагу.
Ukraine really, truly has been at the forefront of the Commission's attention and its work. And I'm just going to cite, he has many accomplishments. I'll just cite one. Kyle was the lead author and promoter of the groundbreaking and famous, or if you're a Russian or global bad actor, infamous Magnitsky Act, which has served, as you know, as a model for legislation around the world. So Kyle also is just back, and I mean just back from a fascinating trip to Ukraine. And I think it'd be great if you heard about some of his adventures there. I won't repeat it. He called me a few days ago. We were talking about him, but I think there's a very interesting story there. So I'm going to give him a leeway where he doesn't have to quite stick to the topic or to the theme if he chooses not to. So it's all yours, Kyle.
Thank you, Orest, and thank you, Walter and Mick. Good to see you guys. I've enjoyed being part of these conferences, going all the way back, I think, to my first in 99, 2000, back with Herman Perchner. So yeah, you know, and Orest, for the introduction, you know, one of the things I tell since this 24th of February, we've made the decision to only work on Ukraine. During peacetime, you know, we covered 57 participating states of that comprise the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Since February 12th, 24th, we cover one, and we focus on Ukraine. And if there's not a Ukraine angle, we don't take the meeting. And if there's a Ukraine angle, we never refuse the meeting. So that's kind of our MO these days. And it's also a point of great pride for me as the chief of staff there that pretty much our entire staff roster are sanctioned by the Russian Federation, including former staff, including administrative staff. And you know, when the empire put its 1,000-person enemies list out, I went through very quickly, and I was, you know, very carefully, and was looking to see if any of our colleagues at the foreign relations committees were on there. And no, in fact, we were the only ones on Capitol Hill. So they better get busy. In any case, yeah. So I will depart from the topic rather sharply. Because you know, I'm really not an expert where the topic is concerned, but perhaps, you know, associated with the topic, I'll just say that, you know, my Ukrainian experience, you know, begins in 1999. I ended up being a student in Kharkiv studying Russian, and there I met my wife. And what is it, some 20 years later, 8 children later, you know, we sort of consider myself at least a Ukrainian in law. And my whole family and all my children spent a year just headed into the pandemic living in Kharkiv, which, given what's happened since then, I've been particularly grateful for the opportunity to share with the children and to show them the pictures and to say, look, you know, this is your playgrounds. These are, you know, these are your classmates, you know, and think about them and think about what they've been going through. I finally brought my in-laws out this past Thursday night. I had gone into Kharkiv in April to try to get them out, but they weren't ready. So we dropped off some equipment for 20 sniper teams and, you know, called it a day and considered it a good trip to Kharkiv. And so, you know, and one of my, you know, speaking to the topic and this question, one of my big worries headed into this storm was what would become of a city like Kharkiv. Because I knew that there was a sizable pro-Russian sentiment in the city. And there was also a sizable pro-Ukrainian, pro-independence, pro-freedom sentiment in the city, and was worried that when you had that kind of high levels on each side, what sort of, what sort of bloodshed could result. And it seems obvious in retrospect, but what happened was that sentiment, the pro-Russian sentiment essentially collapsed totally at 5 a.m. on February 24th. And insofar as those with that sort of friendly feeling towards their, neighbors in Belgorod, the more they couldn't believe that what was about to happen could happen, the greater the rupture. So when it happened, the rupture was complete and total, just an utter betrayal. And, they were telling me about, on I think it was day 3 of the war, when the Ukrainian army wasn't in Kharkiv and it was just the Ukrainian National Guard, and the Russians actually drove all the way down into the city on Sumskaya. And, it was just, the Ukrainians were telling me, it was just, what are these Russians doing? They came in with no force protection, and the Ukrainian National Guard killed them all. And, it was sort of, welcome to Kharkiv. This is real now. I've made 5 trips since the beginning of the war. My focus and interest has been this massive volunteer effort, particularly the volunteer effort, the volunteer network that is essentially serving as the quartermaster to Zissels. It's something to me that is remarkable, and I've had a chance to sort of trace the logistics tail even far into the rear, including even into this city where there's a volunteer network, and where, if anyone's headed east, you don't head east without carrying suitcases of stuff. And, I've got in my bedroom, stack of 20 binoculars and tripods that are going to serve as spotting observation posts on high points in cities for these Ukrainian drones. Because it turns out that, if you can see them and hear them ahead of time, you get a great shot at downing them. And also seeing that in Poland. I spent a week in Poland a week or 2 ago, and went and went to the military stores, went to the Polish government sources, went and actually visited our friends at Razum, visited their imprisoned 300 drones that we need to bust out of jail and get to the front. Some bureaucratic problems with, just some of the red tape. One of the things that I did find interesting, and I like to tell to an American audience especially, and probably it was maybe mentioned obliquely here, but the one person or word I didn't really hear on my trip to Ukraine this last time was Zelensky. And I say that not in a sense of an anti-Zelensky statement, just the idea that this is so much bigger than, Zelensky. And I find, as particularly working on Capitol Hill, there's this tendency to personalize it around the person of Zelensky, right? And this is something that you all would know well. And also, your remarks, Bishop Gudziak, about subsidiarity. Of course, in military lingo, we call that mission command, and it is functioning quite well at the commander level, and the ability to understand what the overarching goal is, and then to take those decisions, or command by negation, which is kind of, heads up, we're going to do this, and unless you overrule it, the order is carried out. One of the things that I also came across that I wasn't maybe prepared for, it just hadn't thought about, was, we've heard of filtration, right? The filtration camps. But Ukraine also has a sort of thing that they call filtration for the newly deoccupied or the newly liberated territories, right? Because there is an obvious need, security need, to identify, subversives, diversionary groups, Russian stragglers that change clothing and didn't quite clear out, and also serious collaborators. And of course, you know, a lot of those collaborators have already ended up in Russia. But I do think that this is something, you know, where thought needs to be given, and first in the imagination and in the heart and in the political discourse of preparing to welcome home those who find themselves behind enemy lines, and also understanding that, you know, in a certain kind of, you know, there's in some senses, the Ukrainian state has failed these people, right? And it's not, I don't want to say that the state or government apparatus needs to apologize, because it's understandably failed. It withstood this massive, unprovoked, genocidal, colonial war, and it wasn't able to protect certain parts of the state, right? It wasn't able, for all kinds of reasons, to hold Kherson, right? It wasn't able in 2014 to hold Crimea. It wasn't able. And so these people who have found themselves in these positions, just this piece, right? This piece about getting ready for this homecoming. And finally, we're at a point where finally Western policymakers can actually begin to imagine what they've mouthed in words and seemingly never believed about Crimea since 2014. That, of course, we'll never recognize it, whatever, but you know, you didn't get a whole lot of top-level policy makers actually thinking that it could be possible. And I think we're now at a point where we think, yeah, we can see this, we can imagine this can happen. As for my most recent trip, I did a tour of the front, basically from Kherson to Kharkiv and then out through Kiev. I have purposefully avoided Kiev since the war, just because everybody goes to Kiev. I love Kiev, it's a great city, but you know, every Tom, Dick, and Harry has made a beeline to Kiev for their photo with Zelensky, and then up to Bucha and Irpin and out on the train. And so I feel like, as far as value added, I've tried to poke around in areas that maybe others hadn't gotten into. And I really wanted to come in through the south and to see things in Odessa and Mykolaiv and come up that way. And I was struck by a number of things. One, the hunger, the interest, the eagerness for visitors, right? And especially for official US visitors, right? Which they've seen almost none. And I mean, the reception was, it wasn't a matter of, you know, geez, will I have enough help? How will I get here? How will I get there? It was just, geez, I got all these competing offers. Hey, you know, we're gonna go out here and do this. Hey, come up with us and do that. And so, you know, I was quite overwhelmed with that, and also the trust and the sort of frank sharing of what they're going through, of what's working and what's not working. A lot of angst towards Kiev, a lot of frustration that, you know, we continue to labor under a creaky, you know, legacy of a Soviet bureaucracy in Kiev that sometimes is getting in the way of what we need to do. A real sobriety sort of about the monumental losses they've already suffered. I mean, you know, people ask me, well, was morale high? Well, I don't know that I have a simple answer and say, yes, it was. I can say absolutely the determination was there, and there's no giving up. But there was a real, I was very much impressed by hearing of how much they've already lost, and the losses have been intense. And I, you know, was looking at one particular combat medic unit. You know, out of 100 people, 68 are dead. So it's been a staggering cost. But you know, I also saw a tenacity, a singleness of purpose, and yes, also a ruthlessness in the determination to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity, to expel the invader and the occupant, and also to punish him for his crimes. And, you know, there's a lot of talk, you know, Putin in The Hague and all of this stuff. What I saw and what I expect will look a little more like Israeli justice. And the idea that if the Ukrainians have your number for atrocity crimes you've committed in Ukraine, being in Russia is not going to be any security, and you will sleep with one eye open for the rest of your days. And you may just take a call one day and that phone may blow up. I was able to visit some of the special forces that are operating behind the lines and inside Russia. I was able to visit some of the drone and explosive laboratories and really to marvel at the ingenuity and the cost effectiveness, because, you know, when you look at the cost of weapon systems, right? They say, hey, you know, what does it cost to drop essentially, you know, a grenade or an IED from a Mavic 3 drone? $22, right? And of course they're sending back a lot of the stuff that they capture, right? With extreme prejudice. I was able to spend. We actually camped out on the front with the 46th Brigade above Kherson, and we were in tents right next to the trenches. They served us a wonderful, you know, field dinner, a nice borscht and some meat grilled, and went to bed to the sound of HIMARS going off just across the field, and woke up to the sound of HIMARS. And it is a beautiful sound because you know where they're headed, and it's a quick 3 volley. It's a volley of 3, and then it's a move, and then it's a decoy, and you know, as much as they love the HIMARS and they've made a difference, and, you know, they call the HIMARS Snickers. I don't know why, but that's the nickname they've given them. What I heard a lot was, you know, we need everything, right? We need everything. We need air defense. We need planes. We need all of these things. But we're also struggling from interoperability things. You know, we have weapons that have been delivered that we don't have calibers for, or we don't have enough for, and we want to be able to seize Russian stocks and use it. And, you know, hey, I'm sure you can find forces, and, you know, in Kiev or Lviv who would like M4 carbines, but this isn't war winning, right? We're good with what we have. What I heard was, if you could give us 2,000 120 millimeter mortars, and the mortar bombs, we could shut the front down. And this is something cheap, highly mobile, right? And plentiful, and no interoperability concern. That this would really help equalize the artillery differential. So, you know, I heard that a lot. And, you know, if you could, you know, if 30% of those or so, a third of that could be vehicle mounted, that this would be some kit that could really make a difference. And the other thing we heard everywhere, and you probably heard it as well, is vehicles. Desperate need of vehicles. Yeah, it would be wonderful to have Bradleys, right? And we obviously, US military, we're not going anywhere in unarmored vehicles, but this is, you know, they're dealing with what they have. So used Jeeps and pickups, they get spray painted with camo, they get fixed up by the volunteer networks, and they head to the front, and they've got maybe a 30-day shelf life, right, before they get hit. And so, you know, one of the things we're going to try to look at, you know, is, you know, how can this be done? Public-private partnerships. We've got government surplus auctions. You've got, you know, freight out of big ports like Baltimore, Elizabeth to Bremerhaven. And of course, combat medicine and medics. It's a big deal. It's a big deal, and you've got a lot of people dying unnecessarily. And it has to do, and the vehicle is also an important piece of this because it has to do with the way they do combat collection points and sending in it. And it also has to do with the sort of the lethality rate for the combat medic in the way they're doing the combat collection. We went further up, also went out with the demining crews in Kharkiv Oblast, and boy, the Oblast is just a mess. And driving up, and so we were out in Donetsk, out in Pokrovsk and Pervomaisk, right near the Donetsk airport at a forward mortar position. That was where we actually, that was the sketchiest because the Russian drone had clearly seen us and lobbed 2 120mm shells in simultaneously as we were headed out. We were delivering all kinds of supplies to frontline units. One of the things that really impressed me, again, the drone war is really hot in Ukraine, and it's incredible. And we went to some basically like safe houses somewhere in the Donbass where you've got vast battery banks just blinking, right? And we've went to underground command posts with war rooms of the drone screens that are running 24 hours a day. And these are commercial off-the-shelf drones. And we dropped the drone off at about 3 o'clock in Pokrovsk and then started to head up through Kramatorsk, Slavyansk towards Izium. And our next stop at a gas station, we got a message from the Ukrainians we'd just given the drone to with video that the drone had essentially already been flying bombing missions and had killed 10 Russians. And I was like, serious. And the road up to Kharkiv, headed up Izium, Kupiansk, it's just a lunar landscape. It's just minefields every side of the highway and burned out, Russian equipment all over the place. And the Kharkiv Oblast, just the villages are devastated. The woods are full of unexploded ordnance. Looking ahead, looking to victory, I just a couple thoughts that, I've been thinking about is, this as monumental as a tragedy that this is for everybody. And there's no escaping that. It also, and thanks to the valiant Ukrainian defenders, it also presents a real opportunity to repair the damaged rules-based order, right? To sort of mend that fabric that has been shredded, certainly Crimea in 2014, obviously what we just saw, but even going back to Georgia and Moldova and saying that, if this war really is to end in a way that Ukraine doesn't have to worry about essentially Moscow taking an operational pause to rearm and reattack, it has to include these other things, and the Budapest Memorandum, but we're really, in a sense, this is a continuation of unfinished business from the Second World War, right? There were 2 poisonous ideologies that conspired together and kicked off the Second World War together, not in 1941, but in September 1939, on the 1st and the 17th of September. One of those parties was totally defeated and completely rebuilt and remade, maybe even too much, to the point where it almost isn't willing to defend itself anymore. And the other party never was. There was never anything like a collective accounting. And that's what needs to happen. And, after victory, we're in a totally new world, right? And Ukraine, in the NATO question, and all of this stuff looks very different, right? Ukraine is already the most powerful military in Europe, right? And not everybody is aware of that yet. but at victory, people will be. And then it's a different question. Then it's no longer, I mean, Ukraine needed Article 5 protection before February 24th. But after it has suffered and fought and died and defeated and emerged victorious, NATO needs the security that Ukraine will provide on the European continent. That's all. Yeah, I know it'd be nice if we could have some questions.
That was absolutely terrific. And there's nothing like a very valuable report from the ground itself, especially in areas that many officials and others do not go to. So thanks for your insights, Kyle. Thanks for everything. And thank you. Okay, Walter, I know we're way over. We're good. Okay, great. Okay. Go. I forget his first name. Mr. Hedźmański, go ahead.
Why does there appear to be a lack of solo? Can you turn on the mic?
And wow, sorry. And with that, why aren't they getting the air defense protection, such as drone interdiction and defeat, as well as cruise missile defeat? That's one part of it. And the other part of the question is, why is Ukraine being allowed to fight with one arm behind its back when it can't interdict Russian logistic supplies beyond the Ukrainian borders that are coming into Ukraine? That would be a key, in my understanding, a key element in defeating Russia would be to interdict those supplies so they can't come in and supply Russian troops in Ukraine.
I missed when you were speaking the first part of your question, when the mic cut out.
Sorry, I was asking, why is the perception that Ukraine is getting military aid, but it's being slow rolled to them? And right now, Ukraine needs air defense protection against the drones that are coming in massive amounts, as well as the cruise missiles. There are countries that have pledged support, and some have the capability of defeating incoming missiles and drones, but that support is not forthcoming.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer. I think some of it is exactly what we all assume it to be, right? Cowardice, lack of leadership. There's, especially when you look at this question of long range or being allowed to strike Russian territory. That's ridiculous, right? I mean, somebody told me, like, I can shoot a bottle rocket and hit Russian territory depending on where I'm standing in Ukraine, right? It's kind of a meaningless distinction. Thankfully, Ukraine is able and is striking logistics points and military targets inside of Russia. In fact, deep inside of Russia, beyond the Urals even. But I would certainly, and I think our leaders and by and large Congress would like to see us, at least as the United States, act a little bolder and not be signaling weakness to Putin about somehow that, why should the Belgorod airport be off limits?
Okay, any additional questions?
I'm going to make a comment. I think that three of you, this panel is going to be this panel separate and video lecture. These three presentations. Even though the panel report had three texts per presentation, but I think that you stun people with silence.
I couldn't agree more. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I guess, oh, wait, I'm sorry.
I just will signal, a major topic, the relationship between churches that is being changed by what is happening. one historical constant is that every time there's a Russian occupation, both the Ukrainian Catholic and in any autonomous Ukrainian Orthodox Church are strangled. And these phenomena, which have struggled for their existence, at least in the 20th century, if not previous centuries, are going to be facing a challenge. How will they speak to young people in the 21st century? How will they respond to this war? Clearly, the Moscow Patriarchate is discredited for a century. The hole is just being dug deeper and deeper. Some of this international incapacity to see, has also been present in Western confessional circles and the Holy See. It would be a long session to explain how things are changing. I had a 90-minute meeting with Pope Francis on August 26th. And I think you see that there is a change in rhetoric in the last 6 weeks. But we need to work. We need to work. It's very interesting to see what the what a Helsinki coordinator does these days. I never imagined it. But I think we're all doing something a little bit different than we normally do. One interesting proposal that is on Pope Francis' desk that was reiterated to him 2 days ago by a 26-year-old graduate, Uvuku, who's a Protestant. These are the kind of, conversation, who was in with the Pope for an hour and 15 minutes 2 days ago. He proposed to the Pope that Francis's visit happened together with Bartholomew, that the two of them come to Ukraine. And you can imagine what a shift in everything. I mean, a papal visit happening with the Patriarch of Constantinople to the land which is the epicenter of global change. I don't know if it's going to happen, but if you have a chance to say a prayer for that, I encourage you to do so.
That's fantastic. I mean, I wish we had a lot more time, but we have to move on. Thanks a lot.
I forgot to just add, the Pope Francis had an important role in the freeing of the Azov commanders.
Yes.
He kept Erdogan in the conversation when Erdogan wanted a bailout. This is inside information.
Although that actually, I read about it, so that made it to the public realm. I forget where I read about that, so that's good, yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Paul. Smuchnoho.
Folks, we have some very good snacks out there. I'm going to give it about 15 minutes, and then please, if you can, try to get the plates, because we were supposed to have about 25 minutes, but it probably have to be 15 so we can keep with the regime. The food is ready.